How cool is this size of this book? Isn't this neat? I love this book. Campfire Stories is a collection of books and card decks brought to you by Alyssa and Dave Q to inspire deeper connections and storytelling in the outdoors. A little bit about the editors. Alyssa Q is a design researcher focused on storytelling and creative solutions at the intersection of nature, design, and inclusion, and the founder of Amble, a sabbatical program for creative professionals to take time away with purpose in support of nature conservancies. And Dave Q is a socially engaged artist, writer, and arts administrator, born in Seoul, South Korea, and raised in the United States. He explores the creative tensions of identity, community, and public space in his work. They live with their 2 daughters outside of Philadelphia and are always seeking adventure and connection in the great outdoors. So without further ado, I'm going to have Dave and Alyssa come up and take over. Thank you.
Oh man, that spelling bee sounds so good. You're lucky that we don't live here. I was the 2nd grade spelling bee champion. In hindsight, I think it didn't sit well with my classmates. In hindsight, I think it's just the white kids were offended that I beat them at their own game. But hi, thank you so much for coming this evening. My name is Dave, this is Alyssa. We are the co-editors of this Campfire Stories collection. I want to just thank the Orcas Island Library for having us. I want to thank Darville's Bookstore for carrying the book and selling books tonight, and Friends of Moraine State Park. We were gallivanting all over the park today. This is the last stop of our tour in support of this book, and forgive me for kind of languishing on my intro. We just had such a magical time on the San Juan Islands, so I'm just trying to just extend that magic. But let me tell you about Campfire Stories. I have the pleasure of introducing you to the series. Okay. So Campfire Stories, this is our book series that we started about 10 years ago. We are the co-editors, so that means we're not the writers of, we don't write cover to cover, but we do select the stories. This is an anthology of personal stories, essays, ballads, songs, legends, collected from national parks and beloved regions all over the country. Our series has now started with 2 volumes about national parks and trails. And in each of those, volume 1 and volume 2 includes 6 national parks in each of those stories. We have card decks that are prompts to invite people to tell their own stories. I think the burn ban was just lifted, right, in the area? So, it doesn't have to be an actual campfire. It's just kind of like we're harkening back to that the idea of gathering together and sharing stories with one another. And with these books, we are now collecting stories from individual regions across the country. We had 3 come out earlier this year. If anyone's on the East Coast, we did the Adirondacks, Cape Cod, and Chesapeake Bay. And the 3 that came out this past month are Redwood Coast, Santa Fe, and Taos, and this one, the San Juan Islands book. Let's see. Alyssa and I didn't grow up camping. We come to this experience as adults. We didn't have stories to share with each other. This seems like a public radio crowd. Any This American Life fans, right? There's a brief moment where the hosts are interviewing each other, and they say something like, "Oh well, we actually can't talk to people. That's probably why we do this for a living," right? So, same for us. We didn't grow up with Campfire Stories. We don't have this history of stories to share. That's why we ended up kind of traveling the country looking for stories like this, because we travel to places like this and are always like, what is happening? How did this place come to be? So this project is a little bit about just us feeding that curiosity, wanting to know more, wanting to get a deeper understanding of each place we visit. One caveat I do share is that you're not going to find ghost stories. We won't be telling ghost stories. You can do that on your own time. That is because Alyssa and I, we're wimps. We don't like to scare each other when we're camping in the woods. But the more important reason is that ghost stories tend to take one aspect, a dramatic thing that happened, and just kind of bend that into fiction to tell the most dramatic version of that story. And we didn't want to share untruths about places. There's so much more that a campfire story can communicate about flora, about fauna, about animals, about the people that sustain places. So we hope that anybody who picks up the book and reads through, whether they visited 100 times or whether they've never visited any of these places, will walk away with a deeper and authentic understanding of any of these places that we're writing about. Alyssa's going to tell us a little bit about the process that we use as we find these campfire stories.
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to hold a mic because I don't know what to do with my hands, so it gives me something to do with my hands. Yeah, so we have roughly used the same process for all of our books. I think we have, is it 8 now, technically? Books, which is insane. But for our national park books in this new series, we often try to travel to the place. The only time we didn't travel was our volume 2 of our national park series was during COVID lockdown. And for whatever reason, we had just had a baby and we were locked in our homes and we were like, let's work on another book. But the reason why we thought that was a great time to work on a book was that people were suddenly very available to us. Our first book, we hit the road for 5 months. We traveled to 6 national parks, or was it 7 for the first one? I think it was 7, 6, okay, whatever the number is. And we stayed in a place for 2 weeks to a month and talked to as many people who would talk to us. We dug around in libraries and archives, looking for stories, looking for writers that we liked. That's a really great way to understand a place, but when you are literally locked in your house, we had just had 2 children, and we were like, I don't know how we can hit the road again and do that level of research. And the lockdown happened, and it presented an opportunity for us. The other opportunity it provided was, from the very beginning, it was always important for us to share stories from diverse perspectives and the different ways that we enjoy the outdoors. And those stories didn't always exist in the libraries and archives that we went to, because at some point in time, someone decided something was worthy of saving. So we actually got to create more opportunities, commissioning more people to write about our parks, and also asking folks to travel to the parks as well. So we fundraised to be able to send people to national parks. We had travel stipends because national parks are not always accessible to many people. So with this new series, we decided to work on these regions because we started to feel like the national park constraint was a little bit silly whenever anyone would come up to us and say, hey, when are you going to do a book from my favorite place? And we would have to say, is there a national park there? And that just felt like we were shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. And so that's what brought us to the San Juan Islands. We always sort of start with organizations like Friends of Moran. We start at the local libraries. We get to talk to people. They send us to someone down the road that they feel like we should talk to. And we kind of just go from there, really getting a sense of the community and the writing and the writers from libraries and bookstores. Oh, okay. Did I go away? Great, now I have to do this. And so, yeah, we go to bookstores. Better? Yes, okay. So, yeah, we ask the same 3 questions that sort of gets us to the themes and topics that we want to cover in order to feel like we're covering places in a full and authentic way. We start with, what is your favorite thing about this place? What is something that should be shared about this place? So something that you feel like should come through the stories in the book. And the third question is, what are the things that should not be shared about a place? And that is... Well, yeah, sometimes, I mean, now the new books, the one thing that's different about these from the national park books is there's a travel companion piece of it. So we're suggesting ways that readers can experience the things they're hearing about, reading about in the stories. And sometimes there are secret spots that people have asked us not to share. But we also recognize like our responsibility in maybe promoting more tourism and travel to these places. So we made sure to include a section called How to Travel Well, so that people know ways that they can make a positive impact and not a negative one when they travel to a place and maybe give back. There's a whole section on community organizations and resources. I'm going in a completely different direction. But so the last question, I also asked that because sometimes there's myths and stigmas about a place that we don't want to perpetuate. And as people who are not from this place, it's important that we know what some of those things are before we go ahead and publish them in the book. But it also prevents things that just don't feel authentic or true to the experience. We're from Philadelphia, and when we tell people that, they're always like, cheesesteaks, pretzels, and we're like, there's so many more cool things about Philadelphia that are worthy of sharing. So that's just an example of why we like to ask that question. And then the ways that we get stories for the book, sometimes we find them in libraries, sometimes we find them in bookstores, sometimes we just find writers we really love, like Rena Priest, and we're like, how do we work with you? Can you work with, and we worked with her twice now, so we just pick regions so we can work with Rena. And sometimes, I think I found Jill's book in Darville's and couldn't quite find a piece that fit the themes and topics that we had selected as sort of like our rubric for telling the story of the San Juan Islands. And Jill was willing to jump in and write a piece for the book. Sometimes our writers have pieces that haven't quite found a home yet. I think there was a little bit of Rena's as well, and it sort of just naturally fits in. And are there other ways? I think I've covered all of the ways. We're really open and flexible. This book has like the first rap that we've ever commissioned for a book. That's kind of fun. We have a rap song in here. Maybe the first rap song about the San Juan Islands. I don't know, you tell me. But that's a little bit about how we pull this together, and we're happy to answer more questions from the audience later, but I'm gonna get out of the way so we can have our readers come and share their work, and Dave will introduce them. Thank you.
I want to personally thank this reader for braving the ferry schedule to be here with us this evening. Rena Priest earned an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College and served as Washington State's 6th Poet Laureate and as a judge for the 2024 National Book Awards. She is the author of Northwest Know-How Beaches and the poetry collections Sublime Subliminal and Patriarchy Blues, winner of an American Book Award. She also edited the anthologies I Sing the Salmon Home and The Larger Voice. Please welcome Rena Priest.
Thank you, Dave and Alyssa. Thank you so much for including me in this new work. It's just such a beautiful little book, and I'm honored to be in it. So this essay that is here in the book is also in this collection, which just launched on September 5th, and it's the first essay collection that I've written, and it's called Positively Uncivilized, and it's also for sale back there, assuming I can get my square tap to work. So if I can't, take a little card. There are postcards, and you can find out how to order it and find out more about it there. But this essay is in that book, and it's called Flourishing in the Seasonal Rounds. To my ancestors, the islands of the Salish Sea were a garden. There is a tenet in anthropology that large, complex villages require agriculture. But on the coastlines of my homeland, since time immemorial, without traditional agriculture, we Clactamish flourished. What does it mean to flourish? I think it means that the sun pulls you from the darkness of non-being, bestows on you the gift of life, and calls you forth to brandish all your beauty. If you have ever watched a time-lapse image of blossoming flowers, you will see that they sway and quiver, then explode like firecrackers, integrating and alchemizing sunshine, releasing it as their own shimmering radiance like light in the darkness. To flourish means blooming, but it also means that although blossoms wither and fade, if they receive the proper nutrients, they can come back stronger, more plentiful, and more beautiful with each new cycle. I believe the ancestors understood the cycle of flourishing and aligned with it to benefit themselves and all within that radiant circle. I believe this because for thousands of years they enjoyed sophisticated foodways, a rich cosmology, and intricate artistic traditions without the toil of traditional agriculture. In the winter months, they came together in large villages while warmer months called for travel through the islands to all the beloved places. the usual and accustomed fishing, hunting, and harvesting grounds, spring root sites, summer fishing villages, fall hunting camps. This way of life, our Shalangan, is known as a seasonal round, meaning the people traveled in tandem with the harvests, moving with the seasons. Cultural practices, like controlled burns and selective harvesting, ensured that the gifts of a particular place would return strong in the next cycle. The relationship to food was a direct exchange between the people and the earth. There were no faraway factory farms, canneries, supply chains, ocean freighters, or exploited laborers. No grocery stores or cashiers to ask plastic or paper. Instead, the people had harvest songs, and as they worked, they sang while birds sang back from the trees. The ancestors ate food from the island prairies, forests, and shorelines, and accepted the gifts of a fond and loving landscape that poured forth a profusion of nourishment and beauty, and a feeling of well-being and connection. In our traditional diet, omega-3 fatty acids in salmon provided vitamin D, the sunshine nutrient that insulates people from the gloom of winter. Rose hips and berries give antioxidants, potassium, magnesium, vitamin C and K, fiber and prebiotics, along with their sweetness. Shellfish give B12 for vitality and energy. Wild game furnishes protein. Foraged greens and roots give minerals and medicines, and the seasons offer variety, the spice of life. Every step in the seasonal round offered new ingredients for the endless feast. Flowers glowed in the landscape like wrapping paper on a gift. When a camas flower blooms, it's your birthday. Dig in, enjoy. Blossoms signal forthcoming berries, all kinds of berries, wild strawberries, blackcaps, trailing blackberries, salmonberries, thimbleberries, salal, gooseberries, huckleberries, blueberries. In lowland bogs were tart cranberries, and in the trees bitter red elderberries, each berry with its own dynamic benefits, from boosting immunity to suppressing appetite for long canoe journeys. To hunters, the forests yielded deer, bear, and elk, while the sky gave ducks and geese. To gatherers, the landscape offered fiddleheads and the roots of licorice ferns, which chased away a sore throat. Cattail, skunk cabbage, and wild water lilies, in addition to camas, produced starchy roots that could be dried and saved as staples. Miners' lettuce and clover were eaten as fresh greens, while sea asparagus, wild carrot, and onion added complex flavors. Streams provided clean, clear drinking water, and when the weather was cold, rivers ran with hooligan, whose oil was a welcome warmth, adding umami to the menu. Twice a day, the beaches gave such bounty that the people had a saying, "When the tide is out, the table is set." There were succulent horse clams, butter clams, little necks, cockles, and oysters. Nestled in the seaweed and shallows were tasty Dungeness crabs, octopi, sea urchins, and many other delectables. In the cold, teeming waters off the village's doorstep, all you had to do was drop a hook and up would come a lingcod or colossal halibut. Herring ran so thick that the people raked them from the water like autumn leaves. Herring roe was a delicacy to be savored. There were also flounders, dogfish, snappers, and perch, and of course there was the keystone species, whose generosity sustained all life in the Salish Sea bioregion, the reliable and bountiful seasonal sacred salmon. Around 4,000 years ago, the ancestors devised an innovative technology called a reef net, the operation of which strengthened community bonds. The nets were woven by matriarchs who each contributed a panel to be sewn together like a quilt, ensuring each contributor a portion of the catch. The net was strung between two canoes anchored side by side. It had a hole at the top to allow for escapement. When the captain gave the word, the men in the canoes hauled up the net and the catch was taken from the middle of the run, allowing salmon at the back to continue with fish at the front. This selective harvest kept the runs strong. The reef net design was modeled after a womb. When the salmon swim up the false reef and into the net, they become the spark of life to carry us into a new cycle. This cycle flourished for thousands of years and might have continued for thousands more. But in 1855, the Treaty of Point Elliott was signed. Despite the treaty's guarantee of access to our usual and accustomed fishing, hunting, and harvesting grounds, we were denied our rights and isolated from the garden, the gifts of our homelands, our beautiful way of life. We still maintain our way of life as much as we can within the changes brought about through colonization, but of course the garden is not what it once was. How did our garden come to be? As an Indigenous writer, I'm sometimes asked if I will write about our tribal prehistory. People like to hear our ancient stories. Of course they do, but those stories are not meant to be written. They contain wisdom accumulated over millennia. Their roots are sunk deep in the land and waterways. Those stories acknowledge the living spirit in every plant and animal that lives here. They are like etymology, explaining that flourish comes from ancient times and means to adorn with flowers, while animals are called such because they are infused with anima, from the Latin for spirit or breath. Perhaps connected to the Greek anemos, wind. To be animated, animal, alive, is to have breath, spirit. The beautiful flower we call anemone shares its name with the sea anemone, which translates from the Greek as windflower, or daughter of the wind. This name acknowledges a relationship between the wind of the world above and the wind of the world under the waves. My ancestors also observed the blossoming of flowers and the shift of the wind. They acknowledged a relationship between our world and an unseen world under the glittering surface of the Salish Sea, home of the Quilhomichin, our relatives under the waves, also known as southern resident killer whales. Because of the unique culture of the Quilhomichin and our ancient relationship with them, in our shared homelands and waterways, we understand that their world mirrors ours. We understand that what happens to them happens to us. It's easy to recognize this relationship when you look at the similarities between their culture and traditional Tlachtamish culture. Like us, Quilhomichin are good at catching salmon. They follow the lead of their matriarchs and always travel together as a family. They are also known to sing and gather in celebration with neighboring pods. For all these reasons, their name acknowledges our connection, our relatives under the waves. We understand our world a little better by understanding how it is named, how it came to be known, and when we understand something, we are better able to love it. This is what the ancient stories do. They give meaning and anchor us in the world. A long time ago, some say as long ago as 12,000 years, the glaciers receded, leaving a rocky, barren landscape. The majestic forests had yet to take root, but there was water, clear, cold water, and then the salmon came, bringing all the rich minerals of the sea in their shining bodies. Everything partook of these riches and began to flourish. The ancestors came down from the Fraser River Canyon and made a life in these islands. Because it's good to understand something about this place and our relationship to it, that you might love and respect it as we do, I will share a Tlachtamish story that I made into a poem with permission from my Aksala, my teacher. The story is an abbreviated telling of a longer saga. It is not my story, I do not own it, and it is a Tlachtamish birthright. It is not to be shared without permission from our culture bearers. My version is only an iteration in an ongoing, fluid, and ever-changing tradition. Like others in our oral tradition, this story has flourished, been animated by the breath and voices of many tellers over hundreds of generations across the region. This is the story of Kwame and Quilshan, two mountains in my homelands, and how through their parting of ways the islands of the Salish Sea came into being. A long time ago, the mountains were married, for some reason, who knows why. One day, Kwame decided it was time to be on her way. As she traveled, she wept, and her salty tears became the swirling eddies of the Salish Sea. Soon she grew tired and stopped to rest. She set down her tukwitch, her bow, to have a bit of halal, camas, and when she got up to go in her sorrow, she forgot her tukwitch and dropped a little piece of her halal. These became the islands the people know as Tukwitch, the island shaped like a bow, and Pananachwang, the island where we go to Panach to dig for halal. She went along this way, leaving gifts for the people, and the gifts have stories to map the bounty of the Salish Sea. When she arrived where she stands today, she decided that was far enough away. Sometimes, on a clear day, you can see her all the way from her old homelands where once she stood with handsome Quilshan. He likes to catch a glimpse of her glowing majestically in the rare sunshine. He could look at her and nothing else for the rest of his life. But soon she decides it can't go on this way, and she draws the clouds around her face to disappear back into the gray. And that is how the ancestors explain these blankets of clouds, the falling rain. In my work, I had an opportunity to speak at an event in Canada. I shared the story of Kwame and Quilshan. Afterward, a tribal elder, I don't remember which nation, thanked me for sharing. He told me Quilshan was their mountain too. He relayed a few anecdotes from their stories, and it made me smile to hear the affection with which the elders spoke of our shared mountain. At a similar event on the Saanich Reserve in Canada, I noticed that some of their language corresponded to words I know in Lummi language. The similarities were explained by a tribal elder with the aid of a large map of the Salish Sea. On the map, he circled a traditional Lummi village site out in the islands. Then he circled a Wasanich village site and drew a line between the two. "Look how close we were," he said. "You could get in a canoe in the morning and ride the current to be in Lummi land by the afternoon." It was a lovely reminder that we are all connected in ways we may not even be aware of. We each are a part of something bigger. We Tlactamish have been here sharing this landscape, these waterways with the flora and fauna of the place for a very long time. We will continue to be here for a very long time. As the elders say, our human lives are just the blink of an eye in the Creator's timeline. International borders, destruction of habitat, endangerment of species, and other consequences of colonization cannot last forever. Until then, may we seed knowledge of our rich heritage and make our minds fertile ground where a dream of natural abundance can take root in our collective imagination, so that together we might enter a new cycle of flourishing.
So much, Rena. Okay. Next, I want to invite Jill McCabe Johnson, who has written 3 poetry collections, Tangled in Vow and Beseech, Revolutions We'd Hoped We'd Outgrown, and Diary of the One Swelling Sea, as well as narrative, nonfiction, and fiction. She teaches creative writing at the Skagit Valley College and co-owns Kangaroo House Bed and Breakfast Inn in East Sound. She is also founder and editor-in-chief of Wandering Angus Press. Please welcome to the stage your very own Jill McCabe Johnson.
Thank you, Dave and Alyssa. What an incredible, let's see if we can do this right. What an incredible book you created. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to the library, to Darville's, to Moran State Park, Friends of Moran. And Rena, what a beautiful essay. Isn't she a treasure? Yeah. So Moran State Park, I think, is the most beautiful, incredible park I've ever been to. I really love it. And as much as I love it, I'm not going to read about that today. I'm going to read about its little sister, we'll say that, Obstruction Pass State Park. My husband and I not only have a B&B that keeps us busy, we have a dog that keeps us busy. His name is Skipjack. And the title of this is Following Skipjack. From the trailhead at Obstruction Pass State Park on Orcas Island, my husband, our dog Skipjack, and I head down the main trail with no elevation gain and only a half mile to the campground and beach. Walking the woods here is a bit like time travel. Interpretive signs remind us that this land was once under glaciers. The Cordilleran ice sheet and Puget Lobe covered the San Juans and much of western Canada and the Pacific Northwest. The slow-moving ice scraped and exposed graywacke, a sedimentary bedrock formed 4 million years ago, and left in its wake a mantle of glacial till the ice had picked up in its travels. Not unlike today's human population in the islands, the rocks we now see come from a diversity of places and circumstances. Archaeologists and anthropologists are still learning about the various peoples who have lived here over time, and in fact, less than half a mile away is the site of a recent discovery that upended our understanding of the history of the entire Salish Sea region. The finding came in 2003 when, before going on vacation, our friends hired workers, and you might know them. I thought they were going to be here tonight, but they were rushing back from traveling. But this is about Tony and Nancy Eyre. Before going on vacation, they hired some workers to dredge their overgrown pond. With a backhoe, the workers exposed what looked like bones from a very large animal. Unsure what to do and worried their equipment would cause damage, and maybe worried they wouldn't get paid if the site work stopped, who knows. They carefully dug up the skull and bones and smaller fragments with their hands. Under ideal conditions, trained archaeologists would have handled the site very differently. Testing soils as they went, meticulously mapping the depth and distribution of the bones. To be fair to the workers, though, they had no way of knowing the age of the large animal they'd unearthed or its historical significance. What to the untrained eye might have seemed like a remarkably huge American buffalo, possibly from a farm, turned out to be a bison antiquus, a prehistoric and much larger ancestor to today's bison. Using carbon dating, the scientists later determined the animal had been killed and butchered by Paleo-Indians roughly 14,000 years ago. The reason this find was important to archaeologists was because the animal provided the first evidence of pre-Clovis habitation in the Salish Sea basin. And I just want to say that this is not a surprise to anybody familiar with the oral tradition of the area. But there were a lot of scientists who said, oh, no, and they had their ideas about how people migrated here and how long they had been here. And finally, there was, some evidence of that habitation. I look at the forest around me and imagine how back then, when glaciers had somewhat recently receded, we would have walked on grasslands and hunted for megafauna, all while staying on the lookout for the now extinct short-faced bear. Today, there are no bears of any kind on the island, except on the rare occasion when a juvenile black bear swims over from Vancouver Island in search of a mate. Each time it happens, wildlife officials trap and transport the young bears to the Cascade Mountains. I always find it funny because at Darville's there would be these conversations about what to do with the bear, Darville's being like the community center for all of these important conversations. And it's hilarious. So next time, go to Darville's and listen to the community conversation about the bears. On this late spring day, instead of a grassland savanna, the terrain is covered by indigenous trees, shrubs, mosses, and other plants. Where the sun penetrates the overstory, it paints a shifting light show of sunspots. Western red cedars rise like entrance pillars to the park, evocative of the traditional poles the Coast Salish have carved in the coastal Northwest for thousands of years. Our dog sniffs his way past Mahonia and Salal while I crouch to inspect tiny wildflowers like starflower and sugar scoop. We have hiked every public trail on Orcas Island dozens, if not hundreds of times, including this one, a favorite. We enjoy marveling at the seasons, cycles, and ambiance of these woods, how it shifts with the weather, as well as from the plant life in varying stages of florescence and decline. A few weeks earlier, we would have seen chocolate and fawn lilies. Another few weeks will bring madrona tree flowers, strawberry blossoms, and Nootka rose. Each section of the trail reveals different micro-ecosystems. Here, cedar roots crisscross the path. A game I have played since childhood is to make shapes out of the roots. like looking for shapes in clouds. Today, they appear to me like dozens of small, brownish-green crocodiles swarming through a muddy river. In childhood, my sister Janelle and I might have challenged each other to dash through the trail without getting eaten alive. I can imagine us running across the backs of the make-believe crocodiles and pretending to stomp their long jaws shut so they can't bite us. Up ahead, woodpecker holes pepper a Douglas fir snag. The elongated excavations suggest the work of pileated woodpeckers who dig into the sapwood of dying firs and pines in search of beetles, carpenter ants, and other tasty wood-boring bugs. They often hollow out nests in the cavities of trees, too. This tree, whose top is long since gone, has rows of holes wending up the trunk from ground level. Well over my head are two larger, partially excavated holes, possibly the start of a nest that was later abandoned. We stop, and with the aid of an app on my phone that can record and identify bird calls, we listen for sounds of a pileated woodpecker. Its high-pitched pulsing sound, or its clucking calls that I swear sound like a louder, more fervent version of my brother-in-law's pet hens. The songbirds almost seem in concert with one another. Their trills layer and braid. I'm glad for the app because there are so many birds I can't distinguish the individual calls. It identifies song sparrows, Pacific wrens, and orange-crowned warblers, but no woodpeckers. Skipjack runs ahead as far as his retractable leash will allow. His yellow bandana flounces in jaunty contrast with his black and white spotted fur. While he snuffles at the base of a red alder, I take time to enjoy succulents in bloom. The broadleaf sedum, whose Latin name is Sedum spathifolium, I'm probably butchering that, loves this rocky habitat and has a yellow starburst-like flower even brighter than the dog's bandana. They cling to the thin soil scattered among several larger stones lining this part of the trail. Nearby, Castanea hispida, also known as harsh Indian paintbrush, blooms in a vivid orange-red atop long, hairy stems with lance-shaped leaves. I recognize this perennial that often stays green long after other perennials fade in the fall, not because they have a larger growing cycle, but because their roots are parasitic. I scan the neighboring plants to see which might be having their water and nutrients stolen, maybe snowberry or ocean spray. But without digging into the roots, I won't be able to tell. Next, a patch of short spur sea blush forms a carpet of deep pink blossoms over leaves that look like wings on either side of the flower's stems. At first, I mistake the ones in bud form for wild allium of the onion family, but once I see their petals leafed out, I know they are in the honeysuckle family. You probably recognize these that are like this. There are so many flowers in bloom on this day in mid-May. The bumblebees and other pollinators have plenty to savor, as do we. Perhaps my favorite section of trail is where a copse of big leaf maples towers above, on sunny days like now. And especially in spring when the leaves are bright green, the canopy becomes a mosaic of brilliant greens that glimmer with light. I could stand dazzled here all afternoon, but Skipjack has spotted a Douglas squirrel partway up the trunk. Resembling more of a chipmunk than the introduced red or gray squirrels, Douglas squirrels are indigenous and prolific where they thrive in undisturbed forests. This one barks sharp warnings to Skipjack, but more curious than anything, the dog merely watches and doesn't bark back. We continue on the trail through a small campground into the beach, where we can now see a vast expanse of the earlier mentioned rocks left by glacial till, such as granite, quartzite, volcanic tuff, conglomerates, jasper, agate, and more. Many have been polished by their movement with the tides, some exposed jagged, broken edges. The overall effect appears to be millions of small pebbles in varying shades of gray, until we look closely and find tones of ivory, burgundy, peach, plus creamy yellows and soft greens that range from sea foam to dark seaweed. Today's especially low tide has revealed colonies of barnacles attached to anything sturdy enough to hold them. Although their lifespan is only about 5 to 10 years, the crustaceans have existed on Earth for at least 325 million years. The receding tide has also exposed tide pools rich in miniature sea life. Anemone tentacles riffle in moving water. A frilled dogwinkle with its peach snail shell has bored into a largish barnacle to access the tender meat inside. Sea stars like to feed on barnacles too. We used to see hundreds of a local sea star called the Pacific Blood Star in colors ranging from bright orange to purple. In 2013-14, a wasting disease nearly wiped out the sea stars all along the western coast of North America. Fortunately, the population is on the rebound. With each visit to the park, we look for them lounging with their spiny rays, lolling over each other like how puppies flop in a heap after play. The water appears calm, almost glassine. To the south and east lies Obstruction Island, beyond that Blakely Island, and in the distance, across the Salish Sea, Kulshan rises amidst the Cascade Mountains, still partially clad in winter's snow. On another day, we might see shorebirds such as great blue herons, kites, or the black oyster catcher, with its bright orange beak crossing our view. But this afternoon, we only spot seagulls who swoop and call with their plaintive, almost haunting cries. 2 summers ago, we saw southern resident killer whales here hunting for salmon, maybe a quarter mile offshore. The orcas glided along the surface of the water while whale watching boats cut their engines and bobbed in the waves a respectful distance away. We continue along the beach and admire the various seaweeds such as porphyra, sea lettuce, bladderwrack, and bull kelp, temporarily drying in the sun till the tide returns. When Skipjack begins foraging for dried out crab shells, we know it's getting close to his dinner time. We clamber up the stairs between the beach and campground, chat briefly with campers who've come from Bellingham across the water, then make our way back along the trail. We stop to admire fresh leaves on the manhonia, or Oregon grape, and the bell-like flowers on salal that in fall will form a hard berry the birds and other wildlife will feed on come winter. I become fascinated by the wood grain inside a hollowed-out snag, like seeing a tree from the inside out. In the distance, the early evening sun shimmers off the water, and I'm reminded of the hour, how hungry the dog must be, and how hungry we suddenly are too. We'll return to this trail many times, and we'll marvel once again at each plant in its cycles. This summer, stalks of foxglove will spring up in areas more open to the sun. Digitalis, the heart medicine derived from these plants, has been in use for at least 200 years, and possibly as far back as the Roman Empire. I love watching how tall they grow over the summer as they shoot up more foliage and flowers. As summer progresses, so will the activity of dragonflies and damselflies whose names, such as blue dasher, spot-winged glider, and vivid dancer, are nearly as charming as they are. By late summer, the sap of cedars and other greens will perfume the air like they do now. Come fall, my husband will notice fraying along tree trunks where running deer scrape the velvet from their antlers. I will look forward to when the big leaf maples drop their leaves that can be bigger than dinner plates. The multicolored leaves will coat the forest floor and soften our footfalls along the trail. And in winter, even if the trail is covered in the occasional snow, Skipjack will traipse happily onto the beach, sniffing out pygmy rock crabs, spiny red sea stars, and butter clams. We'll follow, hanging just as happily onto his leash, eager to make our own discoveries. And who knows what other secrets this land holds. In the time since the nearby Bison Antiquus discovery, others have been found on the island. And only a couple of miles north of us, on Susha Island, paleontologists discovered the first dinosaur ever found in Washington state. While looking for marine fossils, they spotted a partial femur, or thigh bone, embedded with rock and fossilized clam shells. Eventually, the scientists were able to identify it as being in the theropod family of two-legged meat-eating dinosaurs. Picture a smaller version of a velociraptor or Tyrannosaurus rex that lived roughly 80 million years ago, long before humans ever walked the earth. It puts our brief time on the planet, and especially our brief time on this trail, into perspective. And yet, I can't help but feel a part of it all. Fleeting, yes, but I'm grateful to be here experiencing this moment in time on this island in a world layered with all that's come before and ready for all that's yet to come. For now, though, I'm content with everyday marvels, like the time we watched bald eagles teach their adolescent young how to fish, or encountering piebald deer with a rare genetic coloring that makes them more white than brown. And I still hope to see the delicately modeled pattern of black, white, and yellow-green wings of the island marble butterfly, one of the most endangered butterflies in the world, thriving once again throughout the islands as it flits along, flower to flower. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. So we're going to open it up to questions in a moment, but I wanted to just quickly read from the introduction of another major theme of this book that I hope comes along and through some of the stories, but I wanted to touch on it because we have the community here, and that is something that I found really unique about the islands here. For the people who call the San Juan Islands home, the glue that keeps them together is the central role of community. In every place we travel to for the book series, we like to ask locals, what do you hope comes through the stories in our collection that would give readers an authentic sense of this place? People's answers usually describe the natural landscape and experiences in it. But here, every response was the community. If you dream of moving to an island to avoid other people, the San Juans are not for you. Locals love to joke about there being zero privacy and you couldn't commit a crime if you wanted to. There's nowhere to go. Shaw Island librarian Anne Frances Wysocki shared with us, if you want to live here, you have to participate in the community. Some people come here because they want quiet and they don't want to have to deal with people. But we have an EMT service, we have a fire department, we have the library. There's a number of things that are totally volunteer driven. If you don't participate, how do those things happen? Building a strong, engaged community requires a commitment to caring for each other despite differences. She goes on to say, many people are very conscious of the fact that we have to live together here in spite of political differences, in spite of economic differences, or differences in personality. People think long and hard about, how do we live with that? How do we keep relations between people? It was the community and its traditions that charmed Anne and continued to lure her and her husband back for 2 weeks every Christmas, and the very same reason that brought them together back to retire. Every holiday season, the school puts on a beloved musical for the island where something happens to the characters while off island, and they have to get back on island. Through our conversation with Anne, we learned of the many ways that community shows up for its residents. Whether meal trains for the sick or help with late-night plumbing emergencies, everyday gatherings like workshops, poetry reading groups, and weave and stitch nights, or annual traditions like the 4th of July parade, the Christmas musical, and the school field trip fundraiser. We learned that it takes care to live on an island. It always has. What sets the San Juan Islands apart isn't just the peaceful lifestyle away from it all. That masks a rugged resourcefulness necessary to make ends meet. Hardships draw people toward a shared understanding that the challenges of an island living are better faced together. The collaboration, cooperation, and respect necessary to hold together the community mirrors the complex conversation of sea, strait, coast, and land. The San Juans draw their power from the beauty of a community working together to heal, preserve, and regenerate the land for future generations. So I will end there. I hope the stories here tonight have resonated with you. We want to thank everyone for sticking with us, for coming out to the library, the bookshop, Friends of Moran, oh, this is my daughter Lula. She really wanted to be on stage with us for a little bit tonight. You're giving her exactly what she needs right now. My other one is hiding over there in a chair. That's exactly where she needs to be. She does not like the attention. But we're happy to answer any questions you may have for us, for our contributors. Oh yeah, if you want to come up, yeah. And feel free to just raise your hand if you have a question. No questions tonight. Come on, someone has a question.
I have a silly one.
Okay.
Where did you go to school so I can learn to write like you do?
So I did my undergrad in the creative writing program at Western Washington University, and then I did my MFA at Sarah Lawrence College in New York.
We're all applying tomorrow.
How about you, Jill? Jill McCabe teaches people to write like that.
I did an MFA at Pacific Lutheran University, and then I did a PhD at the University of Nebraska.
Yeah.
As editors, how much guidance did you give? Did you say, would you write about this? Would you go into those pieces, you know, and put your own stamp on them? I'm just curious about the process.
Yeah, it's really different. It feels very loud. It's really different based on the writer and the situation that we're sort of finding their work. I mean, I feel like because we've worked with Rena before, we're like, you write what you want to write, it's gonna be good. And we like have a relationship, and we you know, she sort of understands the format of the book. I couldn't remember. I was trying to think with Jill. Did I give you any direction? I mean, usually there's I will say generally there is a rubric that we have. Like it's literally like a spreadsheet on my computer, and they're like, I need a story about these 15 things, and usually I'm able to find them, and the ones I'm not able to find, we commission those. I think that maybe early on with Jill, we just talked, and it sort of, for us, was the piece that, we often have a piece that sort of walks you through either the history or walks you literally on the trail of like what it looks, feels, smells like, and I think that's what, when Jill shared Following Skipjack, sort of was for us, but.
Yeah, we had we had they were great to work with, by the way, and we had a conversation early on where it was pretty wide open, and so I just brainstormed a list of possibilities, and one of them was, you know, just walking the trail at Obstruction Pass State Park, and they liked that idea, and so I went with that, and then, you know, I was like, well, I'm not sure, you know, and they just said, just write it, and, you know, it'll be fine, and they were just really open to, you know, I mean, I think you guys said, give a little bit of history of the place, but I think I had already, when I brainstormed it, I said it would be like a time travel kind of piece of, you know, walking through history. So, you know, somehow we were on the same wavelength anyway, but yeah, and then when I turned it in, there were a couple of minor edits, but they were mostly things like, don't name the Merlin app. And I think that probably came from Mountaineers, you know, just, yeah, and I think I had Tony and Nancy's names in there, and they said, well, maybe it's better not to name people, and, you know, I think that was probably Mountaineers too, so it was more kind of legal stuff, I think. But anyway, you guys were so great to work with.
I think the Merlin app might have been us, actually, and I think that was just to not remove the reader from the names of the plant life and everything around it. And Mountaineers usually doesn't, to go to the process, Mountaineers doesn't really touch the book until we submit the manuscript. With our commissioned pieces, we often start with something we'd like them to write about, and just depending on the writer, sometimes we do actually go in and talk about structure and conclusion and some of more hands-on editing stuff, but most of the time we don't. It's very light editing and collaboration.
Do
you also do stories about people who live on the island or the places that you're writing about?
Yeah, sometimes it does end up being about particular people. We have a piece in this book from June Byrne, the book Living High. And we actually had her granddaughter come out to our event in Bellingham. You both were there too. Sky Byrne came out. But that's from her autobiography. And her husband, Farrar, I think is the pronunciation of that name. I would say, like, I don't know, have any of our other books talked about one single person, like, as a full theme or topic? I don't think so. I mean, it's a lot to put on one person. Our national park books, each park only has, say, 5 to 6 stories for each place. These new books, we get to share around 15 or so, but it's still very limited. So sometimes it comes up, it just really depends on the place.
How do you decide the order?
How do I decide the order? I think that there is a natural conversation that happens between the pieces, and it's not intentional, but there'll be some theme or topic within it, or a touchstone, a piece in a story, and then we want something to follow after. Do you want to talk about the Grand Canyon piece about the fires and hiking down the rim? No.
I could, but I don't know what you're
Write it down and then.
Yeah, I mean, we often, we had a writer, a poet who is like a barefoot runner or a barefoot hiker or some barefoot something. And so she wrote a piece about her hike down. It's not about her being barefoot, but that is like kind of her thing. And then the next story that we feature is from a volunteer firefighter who was there in the Grand Canyon putting out fires, rescuing people, often people who hike barefoot. And so it was kind of just like an interesting, like showing both sides of it. Like, yes, it is a really deep, cool way to experience a place, but also the downside of something and the risks involved and how that impacts other people and the landscape. So there's like a natural conversation that happens between the pieces. There's no real set reason. I guess the only one thing that we do usually start with is like an overview, a piece that I feel like gives an overview of the place. So in this one, it's really about sort of like the geology, the thousands of years before, and giving you context of like why the oceans and the mountains are the way they are. But so we usually find something that is like a more all-encompassing piece if we can, as the first piece.
And then we also do a little bit of work where it's like, if there's a really long essay, we'll break that up, we'll put a poem right after it. Just to think about pacing. Because for us, it's like, there's not one type of story. I guess for us, it's an anthology because we know enough that like we have two very different approaches and experiences, but we all experience our public lands very differently. So it never was going to be, for us, it never was going to be a project where we tell our experience of every public land and come to all these places and be like, this is what we thought was happening. It's always an approach that we had to approach with humility. We understand that the diversity of storytelling is our strength, whether it's both long form essays or then like a little poem and then a song, and we go back into another essay. So I think for us, it's, yeah, there are ideas in the public realm right now where they're saying diversity is not a strength that we should strive towards, but that has always been the foundation of our books. We all experience our public lands differently. We all are going to raise our voices together to continue to preserve those public lands. So I think that's how the order gets set, that's how the search happens, and that's why we continue to work so hard, spending a lot of time in each place, but also doing all these different modes of research. We've got a call for submissions, just understanding that we as the two editors are incapable of telling the full rich story of our public lands. And I think that is certainly the work of the writers here that are kind of sharing that story about that, writing those stories and sharing those stories. And that's all of you that are here kind of listening to, receiving those stories and continuing to advocate for places like the San Juan Islands. And then the library does great work in being the temple of knowledge, the Friends of Miranda. Everybody plays a part. So I just want to close us out by saying thank you all for being a part of this story, this American story about our lands. We'll hang out a little longer. I think the authors are here with us a little longer. But I just, please give a round of applause to yourselves for joining us.